Hey everyone, I'm Bobby Nightengale with Cincinnati.com and the Cincinnati Enquirer, and I have a special guest this week, Marty Brennaman, in honor of Fox Sports Ohio is going to replay the 1990 World Series. So who better to talk to than Mr. Brennaman? How have you been, and how are things going now that, in this weird time that we have this right now?
Bobby, under the circumstances, I'm doing fine. I think my daily routine pretty much echoes the sentiments of a lot of folks around this country and a lot of folks around the world. So my people have caused me to call me a very patient person in the past about a lot of things, and my patience is being tested to the nth degree right now. But everybody's healthy, and that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I bet you never imagined. I mean, after your last season, this is what we'd. There'd be no baseball for like this.
Amazingly, people have come up to me and said, boy, look what happens. You retired and everything goes to hell in a handbasket. And I said, unfortunately, it's all played out the way it's played out. And I think that's very unfortunate. And I guess we all go to bed at night, given the nature of the business that we are all in, that the powers that be figure out a relatively safe way to play some semblance of a 2020 baseball season. And I hope that's on the horizon.
Now, obviously, one thing that's, come out of this is that everyone's kind of looking towards the past, the memorable games, the classic moments. When people bring up that 1990 team, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
My favorite ball club. Of all the 46 years I did Reds baseball, that's a team that I absolutely love from beginning until end. And in no way does it minimize the importance of the teams that I was associated with back in the 70s that are known as the Big Red Machine. That's the best team I've ever been around. But the 1990 club was really, really special for me. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that, the Reds won the World Championship 2 of the first 3 years I was broadcasting Reds baseball. So I kiddingly tell people, I thought you were supposed to do that every year. And they go from 76 to 90. And I really appreciated what happened in 1990. The fact they get to the postseason, they play the Pirates, and then they play the A's in the World Series. And I had a genuine appreciation for something then that I obviously did not in 75 and 76, because I was so new to the ball club and new to the industry of Major League Baseball. So 1990 is far and away my favorite team of all time as far as those guys that strap on a Reds uniform.
I thought it'd be cool just to kind of go, just because Fox Sports Ohio will be replaying the games, to kind of go game by game. In game one, obviously, everyone brings up the Eric Davis homer. Just, do you remember kind of the feelings going into it? Reading back now, I mean, the A's were the favorite. A lot of people, national writers, kept talking about how great the A's were, and then obviously Eric Davis comes in and did what he did to kind of.
Well, I've said before, one, they were prohibitive underdogs. They weren't just underdogs; they were prohibitive underdogs. People were talking about. There were a lot of people that would associate the word dynasty with that Oakland ball club. They won a world championship and they lost one, but here they were again. Led by people like Canseco and McGuire, and they seemingly had everything. And the Reds were not even picked to win anything by the so-called experts when the season got underway, and then they end up going into first place on opening night when Barry Larkin tripled, bases loaded down in Houston. The only time in all the years that I was with the club that they opened the season on the road, and that was because of a lockout at the beginning of the season, and they never vacated first place, becoming the first team to ever do that since baseball went to divisional play in 1969. But then the World Series begins. The first 2 games are in Cincinnati, and then the next 3 are scheduled to be played in Oakland. And I think Billy Hatcher was the second batter up, and he got a base hit. And then Davis took Dave Stewart to straightaway center up on the concourse at Riverfront Stadium. And that was a home run. That was a legitimate home run. It just didn't get over the inner wall. It went over that and onto the concourse and straightaway center. And when you talk about important home runs in the history of this franchise, and there have been some big ones. Hal King hit one off Don Sutton in 1973, I think it was, to start the Reds' road back after they fell behind by a lot, and King hit a pinch hit home run off Don Sutton in the first game of a doubleheader at Riverfront. to start the road back, and that was in July. I don't know that there was a bigger home run ever hit than the one that Davis hit, because it certainly set the tone for the World Series and it enabled the Reds to get the lead early against the ace of Tony La Russa's rotation. And then behind the pitching of Rijo and a couple of innings of relief work, they win the first game, and they win it decisively, and they win it in shutout fashion. So, you can't minimize the importance enough or maximize the importance enough of the home run that Davis hit. It was just huge.
In game two, I mean, you have the Joe Oliver walk-off hit. What was it like just calling a World Series walk-off win? I'm sure it has to be a different.
Well, the funny thing is they fell behind early, and then they were able to come back, and I think they tied the game in the 8th inning. And it was not a good night for Danny Jackson. He started for the Reds, and I think he went 2 2/3 innings in that game. And so Lou had to go to his bullpen. And all that bullpen did that night was give him 7 1/3 innings of shutout baseball, enabling the club to come back. And so they tie it up late. And because he had gone so deep, there were so many stories involved in that game. The Tom Browning story, who was scheduled in game 3, the first game in Oakland, 2 nights after that. And so Lou was concerned about the fact that this game might go 15, 16 innings. And we get a call in the radio booth in the, I guess the 9th inning it was. And the word, well, we get a call in the booth that said, Lou has sent a call up and wants you to put out a public plea on the air for Tom Browning to come back to the ballpark. They let Browning go home, or actually go to the hospital, because his wife, Debbie, was on the verge of, she'd already gone to the hospital, was on the verge of giving birth to a child. And so Lou gave Tom the right to go, and Tom went in his baseball uniform straight to the hospital. And while he was sitting around waiting, he got word that the call had gone out. I understand Tim McCarver was doing the game on network TV, and I think Tim's report was, we've just gotten a report that Marty Brennaman, the broadcaster for the Reds, has sent out a public plea to Tom Browning to come back to the ballpark. So they did the same thing. And Browning got the word, got in the car, started back to the ballpark. And before we could get back, Oliver had the base hit off Dennis Eckersley that drove in the winning run. But another story was the story of Billy Bates. Nobody ever heard of Billy Bates. All Billy Bates could really do was run, and Billy Bates could run with the best of them. But Billy Bates got a pinch hit single in the winning inning, the extra inning, off of Eckersley. And eventually he was the man who came around to score on the base hit by Oliver. And if you believe in fate, the ball that Joe hit, if you see the replay, and I'm sure fans are going to see it in game 2 on Fox Sports Ohio, it was a ground ball. It was not well hit, but it was hit perfectly. And it was just out of the reach of Carney Lansford. Don't know he would have had a play, but the winning run would not have scored, at least then. But the ball got by his glove and on down the left field line, just fair. And Bates scores, and the Reds are up 2-0 in the World Series, heading to Oakland.
Yeah. The Tom Browning story, I mean, do you look back at it all now? I mean, I was reading about it. Obviously, read a lot about the World Series, but just the fact that these days, I mean, that would never happen. I mean,
No, it would never happen, because all somebody would do would, they'd had Rick Stowe pick up the phone and call Tom Browning on his cell phone and say, hey, you got to get back here. And credit to the credit Lou or whoever suggested the idea of giving it to Marty and giving it to the Reds radio booth and letting them put the plea out and hope that the message will get to Browning. And I don't know whether Tom got the message because of the one we sent. Somebody told him, or he was sitting in the waiting room at the maternity ward watching the game on television. But you're absolutely right. That would never happen in this day and time. But thank God it worked out the way it did.
Yeah. Do you remember it all? I mean, getting the request?
I thought it would be
normal.
Dave Armbruster, our engineer, you'd said, hey, somebody just called and said that it came from the clubhouse and they want you to put out a plea for Tom Browning to come back to the ballpark, blah, blah, blah. And I said, you got to be kidding me. And Joe and I were in the booth. We were doing the game, and I turned to Joe, and I said, somebody's got to be pulling our leg. And then we got word that it was a legitimate call, and from that point on, we went ahead and did it. But I thought somebody was trying to play a practical joke on us. in the extra inning of that second game of the World Series.
Yeah, such a crazy.
It was
story. Yeah. Moving on to Game 3. I mean, first game in Oakland, obviously, and then you have that 7-run third inning that kind of put the series to bed almost.
Yeah, it was a no contest game. Thankfully, the early big inning and a big night for Chris Sabo. He had 2 home runs off of Mike Moore. And then Browning gave them exactly what they gave him, 6 innings. I think the A's scored 3 runs off of him. And once again, the bullpen came on to pitch shutout baseball. That was essentially the story about game number 3. And it was such a decisive win. Scoring 7 runs in the third against a team that's already down 2-0 is much more emphatic than scoring 7 runs, maybe more devastating to a team to have them 7 runs decide the game if you get them in the 8th. But the fact of the matter is they were down 2-0, and they were in a position, the A's were, that they never dreamed they would be in. They were really very cocky. When they came into Cincinnati, they had a certain swagger about them that it was almost as if they felt all they had to do was go through the motions and they were going to win the World Series. And in Oakland, it was a different story. There was a certain somber type of atmosphere that existed with the ball club, because I think they realized by then that they were in deep trouble and they were facing a team that was far better than they ever dreamed it would be. And then on the heels of that, to have the Reds score 7 times in the third, knock Mike Moore out of the game, led by the bat of Sabo. But that was a game that, Larkin, I think it was the third game where Larkin and it might have been the second game, Larkin and Hatcher had 7 hits between them. But Billy, of course, set the World Series record with consecutive hits. And that was a devastating win, because a devastating loss for Oakland, because obviously they knew they had to win that game. And they not only did they not win it, but they had their brains beat out.
Do you remember it all? I mean, obviously we're looking 30 years backwards now, but just kind of the Reds take that 2-0 lead going into Game 3. You have the travel to Oakland. Did it feel like, Reds players were their confidence was up, or I know they were confident going into the series, but did they always feel that confident going into Game 3?
I think, that was an interesting team. The one thing that if you can compare that team with the Big Red Machine teams is the fact that they never got overly hyped when they were really playing well, and they never got overly down when they weren't. If you go back and look at the season, they did most of their damage in the first half of the season. After the All-Star break, they were very close, if not a 500 ball club from that point on. So they didn't set the world on fire in the second half of the season, but they played so blasted well up until the All-Star break that it would have taken a memorable comeback by somebody to catch them. San Diego, I think, was the team closest to them. And when the Reds clinched it in September, they were rained out, but San Diego got beaten, so that put them in the driver's seat the rest of the way. But they always maintained a very calm, level-headed demeanor about them. So the fact that they were up 2-0 going to Oakland, I don't know that there was a player on the team that was surprised at it. I mean, they were confident, and they didn't pay any attention to the hype surrounding the Oakland club, the Mash brothers, and all that other crap that emanated from the Oakland and the Bay Area camps. They were confident they could win the World Series, and even more so when they went to Oakland leading 2-0.
And then Game 4, I mean, obviously you get the sweep done, but do you remember a lot from it, or did you have to watch back tape? I mean, did it feel like a blur at the time? Or
it was a great ball game. I mean, everything that Dave Stewart and Dave Stewart really did not pitch badly in Game 1. Reds got a lot of their runs off the bullpen after he was lifted. But in Game 4, Dave Stewart was every bit the ace of the Oakland pitching staff. The only problem was he was matched up against the ace of the Reds pitching staff in Rijo, who was out on an absolute roll. And I remember the A's got a run off of Jose in the first inning. And then after that, it was lights out. I mean, I think he retired 21 of the last 22 batters he faced. And the Reds trailed until the 8th inning. And that was a game that Dave Stewart drilled Billy Hatcher in the first inning. I think he had hit him on his hand, forcing him out of the game. I guess people will talk forever about whether or not that was intentional or not, but Dave Stewart certainly had the kind of reputation where he was not afraid to pitch inside and he threw hard. And then Eric Davis suffered that terrible injury to his kidney that forced him out of the game, making a great catch in shallow left field early in the game. So they lose Hatcher and they lose Davis in the first couple of innings of the game. And then because of Rijo's ability to pitch against that Oakland offense the way he did, kept the deficit at a run until the 8th inning when the Reds were able to come back. And Herm Winningham, who came off the bench to go into the lineup, was a major factor in that. He had 2 hits coming off the bench and going into the lineup early. He put himself in a position to, after the Reds tied it up in the 8th on a ground out, I think, by Glenn Braggs. And then it was Winningham who scored the winning run, as it turned out, on the sacrifice fly by Hal Morris. And then Rijo goes out and gets the first batter out in the 9th, and then Lou decides to bring Randy Myers in, and he gets the final 2 outs, the last out being the foul ball that Todd Benzinger caught off the bat of Carney Lansford at first base to complete the 4-game sweep. That was the one game in which Oakland really got outstanding pitching, and it wasn't enough for them. They couldn't win the game.
Is there anything from the celebration that stands out?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Marge shot on the ball club. Quite honestly, I think Marge was upset that the series only went 4. So we go back to the hotel in San Francisco, and nothing had been planned. I mean, I would think any other ownership, and I'm not knocking Marge because she was awfully good to me, but had the Castellinis owned the club, or the Williams' family from way back, or the Nipperts, they would have planned something in the event that the Reds won Game 4 to sweep the series, because the charter flight back to Cincinnati was not going to go back until the next morning. There was nothing planned. We were able to finagle a room at the hotel. Tony Perez and I went across the street to a Carl's Jr. and bought hamburgers and French fries and all that kind of stuff. So all the guys would have something to eat. And we just sat around and talked about the series and talked about the improbable sweep, and improbable at least in the eyes of most so-called baseball experts, and got on the plane the next day and flew back to Cincinnati, and then had the big celebration down on Fountain Square. Yeah,
the Fountain Square celebration, I mean, obviously it hasn't been replicated since. I mean, it was something about, different from that than the 70s celebrations.
Not really. In many ways, it was the same. Obviously, it was in the same locale. It's a perfect place to have a celebration like that because of the square itself and how many people can fill that up, and the area in which the players and all of the club officials and us were elevated so that we could talk to the people that were down below, and the weather was good. And it was a very, very special time. And, the people in this town were crazy over what had occurred. And I got to tell you, when I say it was my favorite team, for a lot of reasons. One, it was getting back to the World Series for a Reds team that had not been there for since 1976. But it's the best team chemistry-wise I've ever been around. The white guys, the African Americans, the Hispanics, there were no cliques on that team, which is very, very prevalent in baseball by virtue of the number of games that you play. All these guys would go out to dinner together. Everybody loved one another. Everybody had everybody's back. It's the greatest chemistry I've ever seen. And I think that had an awful lot to do with the success that they had. I mean, a club that was led by Larkin and by Davis and the nasty boys out of the bullpen. Other managers would bunt in the first or second inning of a game to try and get the lead to take those guys out of the equation. And if you look back on that World Series, that bullpen, though the big three plus Jack Armstrong, who was put in the bullpen, who was a rotation pitcher, and Scott Scudder, who was a number 5 starter in that rotation, they pitched out of the bullpen. That bullpen pitched 13 innings of scoreless baseball in that World Series. I mean, that had as much to do with the success of that team as anything else. It was so much fun to watch them play. and enjoy one another in the manner in which they did. It's the most unforgettable season that I, as a broadcaster, had ever spent with this team.
And a lot of them get invited back to Reds Fest. A lot of players from that team. I mean, how much do you guys still, when you're talking with, say Eric Davis or anybody, I mean, just bring up those type of memories, that 90 season, how much does let's go back to that.
I'll tell you a great story. The Reds honored them their 25th anniversary in 2015, and 30 guys came back. Just to show you what kind of fellowship and camaraderie and love that those guys had for each other. And the Reds did a great job, as they always do, of events such as that. On a Friday night, the Friday night of that weekend, they came on the field after the game, the players did. And I conducted a Q&A with them. And, I don't know, it lasted 10 or 15 minutes or something like that. And then the post-game festivities came to an end, and the players, somebody yelled, "Let's get a team picture." And all of them gathered together, and there were obviously photographers all over the place. And I'm walking away, and 4 players yelled at me and said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm done here." They said, "No, you're not." They said, "You were as much a part of this as anybody else, and we want you in the picture." That's the nicest thing that a team has ever done for me, because, as you well know, there are a lot of guys that don't like me to begin with. They not want me to be a part of anything like that. And it really touched me because they felt the way they did. And I willingly went back and got involved in the team picture. And it was one of the memorable moments that I've ever spent, because of the feeling that I was unaware of that team had for me as being a part of that, which obviously I wasn't. I was on the periphery, as I have been for 46 years, but it was an awfully nice gesture on their part.
Yeah. And just, does it feel like it's been 30 years? I mean, now that when you look back at it?
Bobby, the older you get, the faster time flies. No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. But I think back upon it, occasionally, and I've gone back and looked in my scorebook at the games that they played in the season, and also during the World Series. And we were fortunate to be able to broadcast the games. Now, back in 75 and 76, that was not allowed. Your home broadcasters were not allowed to do the World Series. And fortunately, that rule was changed, and the home broadcasters were able to do all the postseason games, the series with the Pirates, and then the World Series. So it's wonderful memories. Memories that, because of the people involved, I love Lou Piniella. He's the most entertaining guy I've ever been around. I thought he was a great manager, having come from the American League and really not knowing anything about the way the National League brand of baseball was played. And then he's smart enough to surround himself with predominantly National League coaches. Stan Williams was his pitching coach. Larry Rothschild, who became one of the great pitching coaches in baseball, noted for his work with the Yankees for so many years. They had Sammy Perlazo was the third base coach. Tony Perez was the first base coach. Jackie Moore was a bench coach. And these guys, Lou was smart enough to let them run the club, essentially, until he knew the way the game was played in the league. And once he did, he took off. And so I love the coaches. I had a great relationship with them and with Lou. And I'm very, very prejudiced when it comes to talking about that 1990 club, because for me, there was no negative. There was no negative whatsoever.
And last question, just how many times have you seen these World Series games?
You know what? The 1990 series games I've seen one time since 19. Okay. So I'm really looking forward to watching them. It's going to bring back an awful lot of memories, and I plan on watching all 9 innings of all the innings, including the extra inning game, of all 4 of those games. And in all likelihood, I'll probably tape and go back and look at them again down the road sometime. Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. Thanks so much for doing this, Marty. I appreciate it. And I hope you do enjoy just, getting to rewatch it, and, maybe some memories pop back up on the second time rewatching this.
Oh, I'm sure they will, Bobby. I enjoyed the opportunity to reminisce about the 1990 World Champions. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
You bet.